Hi Graham, and whoever else is watching this. I decided to do a video because I believe I can more accurately express my reflection piece on the Indigenous program. The focus of my reflection is really on respect, and I'm going to use examples from the trip to Kiola and how respect is really shown in schools, and then how that is affecting science communication and how science communication can change. Firstly, the program gave me a really good increased appreciation for understanding that I can actually be disrespectful just by not understanding. My previous work life was in a male-dominated industry, and I observed the traits of the respected leaders to understand what traits are going to get me further. And one of those is eye contact, and a strong, solid eye contact is really important for developing strong relationships. In Aboriginal culture, that can actually be seen differently. In fact, as Uncle Chris said, if I look a man in his eye, I want to fight him. And if I look a woman in her eye, I want to her. So by not knowing and by being ignorant, I was unwittingly being disrespectful. And there's so many examples of that in our lives that we need to just look at creating strong relationships, and that's about understanding and accepting that other people will see your actions and words differently to how you might express them. Acknowledgement is also a key to providing and showing respect for the Aboriginal culture. Growing up, I learned that Captain Cook landed and claimed the land, and he founded Australia. He founded this new land that was going to be so prosperous. But the program gave me really good appreciation for the fact that Australia has an 80,000 year history that is rich and full of culture and law and language and art. And I've learned what a privilege it is to be able to call myself Australian along with that history. And this is the kind of things that need to be included in schooling. Schools are getting better. In fact, in our most recent tour in South Australia, there were a couple of aunties and uncles in the schools as we go. So it is starting to come in. It's really important for Indigenous children to have their culture and language acknowledged. In fact, it helps them stay motivated and feel supported. And I think it's important that we have a single world in schools, that we have Indigenous people being able to come to school and not having to leave behind that culture as soon as they step into school. And embracing our differences is really important, because that's what makes us all so great. We have such different cultures. By not trying to change or impose my definition on what Aboriginal culture is also important. And Uncle Graham, in his words, is quite light-skinned. And he's had people trying to impose their views on him. One example was, as a child, his mum used to just hide him whenever the authorities came by, because it was custom then to take the light-skinned Aboriginal children and try and integrate them into white society, because being white is better. Another story is one that he gets quite often, and that is that when he tells people that he is Aboriginal, they will respond by saying, "Well, which part?" As if, because they cannot see that he's Aboriginal, he must prove it. The burden is on him to prove it. And it's so disrespectful to be playing into stereotypes like this, but It's also disrespecting the Aboriginal culture. Trying to define what makes someone Aboriginal just by the colour of their skin is so demeaning to the Aboriginal culture. Now, we've talked about some examples of respect and disrespect, and I'd like to talk to you now about how that affects schooling. So when children were tested in English, a study showed that the Indigenous students were disadvantaged in literacy and numeracy, but this test didn't take into account what they were learning in their Indigenous culture. It didn't take into their language or their communication skills. And having a home language and the maintenance of that, whether it's oral or written, has been shown to be really important for a child's identity. It helps them develop communication skills, develop cognitive abilities, and have those intercultural benefits. And in remote locations, like we have all over Australia, and like the circus gets to visit, it's important to ensure the children not having to flip between two different societies, but have one cohesive society. And that leaves them feeling more motivated. These benefits are not just for the child, but they're for society as well. Motivation, relevance, and connection are key points in engaging children and people in science, as we've seen so many times throughout the year in the circus. In fact, we have tailored our science shows to recognizing who's in our audience and being able to make them have a connection with that science. So, should our science shows be tailored to Aboriginal cultures? The short answer is no. No, because we don't want to again segregate and separate those societies. In fact, it should be integrated in. There's many ways, and we've got a few examples, things like in our fire show. Maybe we could incorporate some culture there where we can use examples of Indigenous ingenuity to create fire, or if that's a bit unsafe, maybe we go to the friction show where we already have most of the friction shows using the rubbing of hands as an example, but maybe we take it further and we say rub harder, rub harder, rub harder, keep going, keep going, keep going. Now imagine those are bits of wood. What's going to happen? You're right, they are going to catch on fire if we go hard and fast enough. And that's how the Aboriginal people used to light fires. The science shows can incorporate so much science, and in fact, our high school shows sometimes get a lackluster response due to the fact that children can find these things online. Maybe we should tailor the science shows in high schools to include some physics, where we can use boomerangs and spears to figure out how they're actually going to work out the science of these things. As a broad view, science in schooling should incorporate more Indigenous learnings as a way of respecting and embracing the culture, and proving that science isn't only done in a textbook, encouraging experimentation and curiosity in science.